First of all, I would like to also, of course, thank you everybody, and especially Magdalena, Aga, and Peter for being here and agreeing to discuss a little bit about event scores and in connection to Fluxus, but I hope not only. For the sake of our presentation, probably I should introduce everybody, and I would be very happy to do that and maybe tell a little sentence like how have we met. So maybe I will just start from the alphabetical order as is in the event. So Peter Frank is a New York-born, Los Angeles-based art critic, editor, curator, historian, poet, and expert on Fluxus. He has worked on for Documenta the Venice Biennale, the Salomon R. Guggenheim Museum, El Museo Nacional Central de Arte Reina Sofia, and many other national and international venues. He is an author of Something Else Press, an annotated bibliography. Very happy to have you here, Peter. We met, of course, because of my research on Fluxus, naturally, I mean. When I started the PhD, I contacted Peter to talk about Fluxus and share his experience, and that's how we met. And of course, I read a lot of Peter's text, and that was also like a source of my work in some cases. And Magdalena Holdar, I met Magdalena through a little different project than the one that we are going to talk about. It was kind of a project that was a predecessor of this one, the event Swirl, that actually maybe that's also important to mention that the whole application idea started with some email chains and I contacted some Fluxus artists. Now one of them was Bent of Klintberg, and he nominated, let's say, the next person in chain, or the one of the next persons in chain, Magdalena, and she wrote also a wonderful book on Fluxus, Fluxus as network of friends, strangers, and things, the agency of chance and collaboration. Collaborations that sadly I was not able to quote so much in my thesis because I not to quote any book, so that's only that. But I read it. Magdalena was kind enough to send it to me, and that was it's really it shares a lot of my I don't know views on Fluxus. So Magdalena Holdar is a senior lecturer of art history and curatorial studies at the Department of Culture and Aesthetics. She is the head of curating, director of a curatorial MA program, and director of studies in art history. She is also an author of the book that I mentioned. This is my notes, so I repeat myself. Sorry for that. And Aga is a researcher and collection care professional specializing in contemporary art. Currently, she is a postdoctoral fellow in the research project Activating Fluxus at the Institute of Materiality in Art and Culture at Bern Academy of the Arts. And because of this, basically, I think we met. That was the main reason. The connections of Fluxus and the Activating Fluxus initiative was the connection that brought us together, I think. And her general research interests lie in the mechanisms and processes of institutional collecting, which with a focus on processual contemporary art formats, such as art projects, participatory art, and performance. She regularly lectures, gives presentations, as you can see, and writes on this topic. Okay, I'm not very good at all the formalities, so hopefully that will get better. But yes, I specifically, of course, I'm really happy that everybody has a little different perspective, a different view from your own backgrounds and what you deal with on a daily basis. So I think that could be also an interesting combination of thoughts and ideas. Okay. So we are meeting here. One of the reasons why we're meeting here is that I created a project that's on, I don't want to say on Fluxus or like event scores, but my whole story of Fluxus is a very personal one. And also, I think that I have to mention probably that I'm not a theoretician, I'm not an expert by any means on Fluxus, but it's just that it's just very close to my interest and also way of thinking about art and my own experience. And so I wanted to kind of also summarize my story with Fluxus that maybe I won't talk too much about that. But one of the things that I have always found very appealing and interesting is the format of event scores, and I wanted to combine those two things. So more like my contemporary approach, or like my contemporary view as a younger generation on Fluxus, with the format of event scores, and that's how the application called event Swirl appeared, and the format is also very much related to Fluxus activities. I should probably say that I didn't want by any means this to be seen as a continuation of Fluxus, or I don't know, this 21st century Fluxus thing or anything like that. It's just my response to how to maybe read event scores, what are event scores for me, and maybe how to share them with other people. Have you all seen maybe the application just quickly, so I can spare the presentation? Okay, that's the first meeting, actually, the first meeting that I mentioned, that is the second meeting. So the first meeting was at the end of April, and that was like a manual, like I was explaining in details how it works and how to use it. So that was in the other meeting. But if you want, we can also go to details of that. I don't want to ask you questions like what do you think or what event score is for you. I would like to maybe focus more on the performative aspect of them and how they could be read. And I have just few examples here if somebody has no idea what Fluxus event scores are about, but I hope you do. The other thing that I would touch upon today a little bit about is that is it only associated with Fluxus, and is there, let's say, a correct way of performing, and what is your experience in performing event scores? I would like to ask you first, maybe when you think about event score, I'm not going to give any definition for now, so not to. When you think about event score, the word, what do you think about? Maybe Magdalena, do you want to?
Well, I can say, I think what I really love with that format is that it gives so much agency to someone else, and that it's like this proposition to do something and to own it, and that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong way, but as long as it kind of resonates with how you read it, it's kind of right. So I think I really like the way that it acts as something that you give to somebody else, or like a proposition that you give to somebody else to think around, or to perform or not to perform, or just to sort of own in their mind almost.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, like that sort of that kind of gesture, I think, to build on someone else, like help someone else build their creativity and their openness of mind. I think it's really beautiful. I think it also comes across very well in your Events World project, actually.
I will comment on that, and if there will be any questions about my own work, then I will of course tell you more later. But and Peter, you have a little maybe different perspective in general because you experienced in your younger years
Yes,
yourself.
I I think well, first of all, I imagine that we all pretty much agree on what constitutes an event score, and that and correct me if you feel I'm wrong or not accurate enough in defining two kinds of event scores. One relying on a notation of uh, that needs to be followed according to an overlying grid of interpretation, and on the other hand, a verbal notation, entirely verbal notation, almost like a poem, who's who is providing the lineaments of an instruction as opposed to an instruction itself. Uh, Now, both these formats predate Fluxus, but emerge in the same discourse and the same places that Fluxus emerged from. Um, and I think we can go back at least as far as 1952 with Earl Brown's folio of six uh, of six notations ending with December 1952 that is entirely an abstraction. Could be like a drawing by an artist in the style or something. Um, but Earl said to me, among the other people, that he wanted the parameters. He wanted to open up the parameters as wide as possible and still give the performers, performer or performers, a structure around which to act and on which to measure their their activities. Um, as Magdalena pointed out, the the openness, the providing of agency by the author of the piece to the real to the performers of the piece is paramount here. Um, but you know, some event scores are a lot more specific than others. Although I think we can agree that basically the graphic scores tend to be ultimately more specific than the verbal scores. And a word on performance practice associated specifically with Fluxus. I don't think I need to remind you all that Fluxus began and maintained itself first and foremost as a movement in new music. It became an art, a movement in visual art subsequently, and in literature. You might say that Fluxus grounding in music is sort of like Surrealism's grounding in literature. Uh, Both wound up uh, visual art movements, tendencies, but maintained the uh, ramifications and the lineaments of the musical practice. Right down to the preference for formal formal performance wear on stage. There was always, from the beginning, an element of musical parody, and also the sense that music was the ultimate thing you could possibly perform. Um, Going on, you know, John Cage said, "Theater takes place all the time wherever one is, and art simply facilitates persuading one this is the case." And also said, "Everything we do is music." And I think those two observations are the touchstones of what we're talking about here.
Mhm. Thank you, Peter, for that. Yeah, that's it made me also to think of the evolution of the event scores of the format, and maybe we can talk about this also a little later, like how it has changed the perception, but also the possibilities of performing it, whether it could be only performance or is it only instruction for performance, or maybe it's something more right now. But I would like to also ask Aga, what do you think about event scores? What do you think when you think about event scores?
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Veronica. It's a kind of a complex question when I think about event scores, because I still consider myself new to Fluxus. It's only been 3 years. I'm studying it, but I'm studying it quite profoundly, and it's a constant discovery of new ideas and concepts. And kind of somehow my understanding of event score is also what it can actually be, and um how can the concept of event score open up the way of my perception of art in general. That's what I think right now when I think about event score. And why is that? I think that yeah, Peter kind of very nicely outlined that there are different types of event scores, and I'm also interested in those event score, because I mean we know, well, some of us we know this early history and how they evolved and what they became somehow, and what were the standards of producing them to a certain extent. But somehow, right now, looking at this story of what was happening in the 60s and 70s, I'm just kind of constantly discovering other ways that the event score was happening somehow, or was being produced. And yeah, on top of those, so yeah, as Peter said, textual, graphical, verbal scores. I also kind of, there are those objectual kind of scores that can be also interpreted. I also I'm writing right now about performance itself as a score that is to be interpreted and repeated to a certain extent within certain embedded within the performance rules of performing. So a performance is an event score that can be responded to or interpreted. So there's photography can be an event score, and that's you have been looking at this idea of actually interpreting photography, or photography, thinking about photography as a score for something, right? Not, I don't know if event or performance, or because I think that also important here is thinking about this word event. And to a certain extent, what is interesting and for the event Swirl is that this event is very much kind of present in your application, because somehow there is a lot of type of scores that are being able to be interpreted within this milieu of visual arts. But then, you know, this event, this kind of like small, I mean, we can also talk about what is Fluxus event, right? Because some of them, they are scored, there's not scored, but somehow this minimal kind of like very contained kind of performance that is kind of event within this Fluxus parlance. So I don't know, I have a lot of ideas. I'm not going to bump, but this is like the first kind of response to what I think of when I think of event score.
Yes, but it also very, very nicely shows that it's basically very open term, a very open form, and everybody kind of, as Peter said, like know what is this, like what we talk about, but it's at the same time it's still something different for everybody. And of course, as I said, like we are focusing now on more on the Fluxus, specifically event scores, but of course the tradition like continued, and other people also try to follow maybe some instructional pieces and things like that. But I was also thinking about what also I guess you started talking about a little bit of the format, because we when you think about event score, we probably just think about, or maybe not just, but the first thing is like the written instruction, like verbal instruction. Um, that it's either performative action, or as Magdalena said, maybe it could be performing the mind, which I totally agree with. And Peter also mentioned this very poetic and maybe abstract scores that are almost unperformable, let's say, like physically in a sense. But what else can it be? Like what form could it take, or does it take any other forms? Does it have to be the written instruction, or maybe it's just the event that it's the event is the score?
But I would say that I agree with, I mean, remembering, as Peter's reminding also, that the risk, I think if everything could be kind of an event score, we end up in some sort of like, it doesn't really catch how it operates, I would think. So, I mean, I think there needs to be some kind of an idea of how we, what is kind of the essential core. And maybe that essential core isn't what it looks like or something, but what it does, sort of. And I think the way Peter is talking about, like the foundation in music is one of those, I think, core aspects, is like crucial. And I think that also signifies an event score from some other kind of instruction. I mean, it's not an instruction in general, it's something else. And then finding a way of understanding, or like trying to formulate maybe, or what is the specificity between an event score and some other kind of whatever instruction.
Exactly. You have to define an event score as opposed to notations for a happening. Alan Capro was very specific and even long-winded in writing out what he wanted, even in his earliest happenings. And I believe that Robert Whitman was the same. That kind of almost narrative scoring was not something that Fluxus picked up. It encouraged instead, as you pointed out, Magdalena, an agency inherent in the performers, that the Fluxus scores and scores like them emphasize what the performers can do, as opposed to the happening scores, which are all about what the performers should do.
And then if it's because there's also the whole aspect of the openness that comes with the authorship, and like the who can perform, whether all the discussions, of course, like whether everybody can perform. So it's, some people can say that, I don't know, there are like musical notations, so like, you know, we can treat them as scores, so everybody can perform as there was a piece of music. But then the other people would say that there have to be quite specific way of performing, and it's not like whatever. Yeah, so that's a whole different area of discussion. But yeah, what about the authorship then? If it's a score, maybe like piece of music, or maybe not. What do you think that's open?
Oh, the authorship continues to reside in the author. The person generates the score, just like a traditional composer of music. Even if the score itself looks like a poem or reads like a poem.
I mean, I wanted to go back a little bit to this previous question, but also trying to bridge to this one. I mean, when I was speaking, and I'm kind of controversially, I'm trying to kind of like expand this this idea of what event score can be. But I mean, I was thinking about when you ask about the event as a score. event as an event score itself. I'm thinking about those instances in which event happened, but there is no written instruction. There was maybe verbal instruction that has kind of been passed through and resulted in some kind of an event, but then the event became somehow a score for next event that emerged from this event. So somehow interpretation of this event, which was in itself quite open, right? So I'm speaking about this kind of other ways, other forms in which event score can exist, and also objects which are emerge from a score, but also become a score by themselves to a certain extent. I'm thinking now, for example, Ken Friedman's open and shut case, that is a very simple kind of concept that has been interpreted and reinterpreted again in different formats, and it became an object that can be performed itself. And where the event is in this gesture of opening the box, whatever format this box has, right? So I mean, so I was thinking about that, and which somehow to bridges to this idea of authorship, of who actually, can claim authorship of an object, of an event score. Is this a collaboration? There is always a lot of question marks around this issues because of this kind of chain of interpretations and reinterpretations that the concept of event score is kind of triggering, right?
That's a good distinction you make between scores that clearly direct one to do something. Although what the something is may be up to the performer, and pieces like Ken's open and shut case, which effectively perform themselves. I think Maciunas thought of the Fluxus boxes in that way. He called them games and puzzles, so that gave agency to the person who's holding the box, opening the box, and discovering what's in it. That could be considered a performance. So that sorry here. So that, well, as I said, the object becomes the performance becomes an object, and an object becomes a performance, and the notation and the object, as you say, conflate and generate one another. One can actually say that if you're reading verbal scores, say by George Brecht or Yoko Ono, or early work by Lamont Young, or certain ones by Namjoon Paik, et cetera. All of these, in their various forms of notation, all of them are verbal scores, to the extent that reading them is a kind of, just sitting down and reading them the way you'd open up a Fluxus box is a performative act. It is not a demonstration of activity, but it is activity. Activity without audience.
Magdalena, do you want to add something or to that?
I was thinking about event score versus event versus score, like how they relate to each other, and if everything that is, I mean, to me, I don't know. I kind of always think about the event score as something that is like comes before the performance of it, and I mean, I know exactly what you mean, Aga, with these, when you somebody performed something and then you kind of wrote it down and made it into an instruction sort of retroactively, and then that instruction was kind of shared. I don't think I've ever thought about event scores as having that kind of I mean, like process, maybe. I don't know, but I mean, maybe that's just because I haven't been I haven't seen them as, to me, an event score is very much like something that is kind of the origin of performance rather than the remembrance of, of performance. Or, I don't know what the word would be, but but on the other hand, I don't know that sometimes you don't even know what comes first. So I guess it's a
Right. I mean, I think it's someone I read about this idea of potentiality of the score, which is not it doesn't have to be or something made a priori or a posteriori or a posteriori. It can be kind of a potentiality of something to happen, you know, somehow. And
yeah.
because I have to also, I mean, I don't know, that was clear from my biography, because I'm interested in this kind of perpetuation and
Yeah.
how art persists and endures to a certain extent, and looking at those art forms, for me, it's also kind of trying to track them somehow, how they are evolving and how they are transforming. And because of this kind of very particular lens, I'm seeing everything being to trigger to something else, and the evolution of those scores into something else. Yeah, that's just my very particular perspective on this. But yeah, I'm happy to kind of share more. And also my it's also something that I also have to say, I'm doing this podcast that Magdalena actually was a part of, in which we are exploring the potentiality also of Fluxus works to a certain extent, and most of them, of course, are score based, or the scoreness of it appears at some point in time, also sometimes a posteriori as well. And it is super interesting to see, yeah, how they change into into what they change and what this change is triggering. And together we were exploring a Bank of Titanberry piece that became an object, which is a score-based piece, which became an object at some point in time, which also triggers some kind of other kind of performance and interaction. And so when I'm speaking about this chain of different kind of things that one event score can trigger, I'm speaking about those kind of continuations, and I'm interested in this.
And the continuation also makes me to think about the preservation, because if we think about the written, whatever is an instruction or just set of words or is an object that could be performed and reperformed and maybe interpret, how do we preserve those actions? Do we need to preserve them? Like, how important is, of course, documentation is a different thing, because it's how to document all those things. But maybe I think I would be more interested in the aspect of preservation and keeping them somehow alive as an art objects to conservation and preservation of event scores, as not only thinking about them as of course like the cards that Maciunas designed and were beautiful, and now I have to conserve them as a next generations to show on exhibitions. But in general, like if we think about the perpetuality and the progress of different works and events or event scores, like how can we keep them alive also for next generations, maybe?
I guess archiving the artist, well, I should say the composer's own working notes and observations and self-documentations is where to start. And that's what people like Hans Zohm and Gene Brown understood from the beginning, and the Silvermans understood from the moment the beginning was over, as it happened. But there was an understanding that preserving the object was only as important as preserving the idea. Fortunately, in intermedia, the object and the idea conflate, and the object can be seen as a performance of the idea. But we want also to gather or to collect around the object so that the idea becomes manifest in multiple ways, as an historic event and as a replicable event. And by replicable, I don't mean reconstructed as closely as possible to the original realization, although that's a way to do it too. But an investigation into the concerns of the composer and the responses of the performers, and finally an investigation of who are the performers. You could say that a researcher going through a collection, coming upon a score, is performing the score. And this illusion between art and life is at the core. This is the core spirit of Fluxus, happenings, intermedia, all that work in the discourse that we're familiar with from the 60s on, or even earlier.
I think it's interesting also how some of them are sort of more performed more often than others, like how some of them fly in a different way than others. And I think it's super interesting to look at the compilations of scores, various kinds of compilations of scores, to see which ones would be possible to do. And I mean, it's a little bit like, also coming back to that thing with the agency that you by having, I think it's super important, like for scholars to sort of be aware of and explore the discourse and the context and the situation. But then again, we also have the effect of the event score as something that you can actually just do if you want to. Anyone can do them, and I think the value of having these compilations is enormous, because then you kind of new generations will continue to do them if they want to, but you don't necessarily trace it or know it, but they're sitting there as a possibility. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing, that they can like seeds in the ground, they just wait their moment somehow. And I think that it's a really nice aspect, I think, of the event score.
And that's
But it's also like when you go back and see what works have been performed in various Fluxus concerts and so forth. It's kind of a sort of a repertoire that of some of them are recurring more often than others.
It's also interesting to see how that repertory, how the emphases in the repertory changes from locale to locale, and year to year. And also, is it too late to write it to create a Fluxus score?
That's one. That's a good one. Yeah. I actually wanted to, can I take it and kind of reverse the question and kind of shoot it back to Veronica, because I would like to ask you actually, Veronica, because you are you are integrating Fluxus scores in many ways in your artistic practice. And I was just thinking about, what do you think about this kind of preservation thing, from kind of perspective of an artist who interacts and who actually performs the scores, 60, 70 years after, 60, they have been conceived.
Yes, that's it. I haven't, I mean, I have performed quite a lot of those scores while doing research, and not only research, but for myself also. I haven't performed that many scores or Fluxus pieces like as work, like performances. I use sometimes maybe the instructional, but I think the most important and also the most valuable in a way, it's your personal experience also. And totally different than, for example, like with I think the most iconic work of Yoko Ono that one of the most, because she had a lot probably. I mean, she did the cut piece, and performing it, for example, in the museum, like a situation with strangers and people, like and people coming to you, and that's definitely was a different experience than just trying some things at my home and not home. I also thought about this at the beginning of our conversation, that we can do those scores anywhere and everywhere. So basically, they could have been really, I don't know, nice thing to do while, for example, COVID situation, right? There a lot of people, there were a lot of projects that came back to this kind of event scoring thing that touch upon the instructional pieces because of that the ability to do it at home. Yeah, so I don't know if I can really answer your questions, because that's it's my own personal experience, I would say, and I still find them fresh in a way that you can just interpret them in your own way. But I also really like the idea that they just can be performed in your own head. And that's what also Milan Knizak wrote me, that he is now too old to perform, but he can only do it in his head, which is very beautiful. And I think that they trigger something, and this is something that I kind of wanted to achieve with the Eventscoring project, that you don't have to necessarily perform those pieces. It's just like you get certain, like a little enlightenment, like a message, and maybe it makes you to think about something. Maybe it gives you, I don't know, some reflection. Or maybe it just takes your thoughts away from, I don't know, the news or whatever. That's I think it's very beneficial in that sense. And I would like to maybe open the group. Like, can feel free if you want to join, because I noticed that there were also some comments, so maybe it's a good moment to do that. Maybe Peter, do you want to finish your thought, please?
Oh, yes. What you were describing as almost this meditative quality of Fluxus performance, particularly in intimate situations, it goes right back to the Zen presence in Fluxus discourse.
Yeah, I see it like I see it as a bodily practice, and also the mindful practice, like mind and bodily practice, because they are two connected, both connected while you do it. And also, if you read it, you will also connect your body with your mind. So that's in that sense, that would be this kind of connection. But yeah, there are a lot of course, and Zen.
Some of them are also wild. I mean, like, don't really lend themselves to meditation.
No, well, you have to, as I said, you have to choose the right ones. Like, there are very, very varied forms.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
What was this Namjoon Paik's piece that? Oh my God, it was a really like the drastic, like horrible thing to do. I don't remember.
Well, his realization of Lamont Young's piece of draw a straight line and follow.
Yeah.
Draw a straight line and follow it, and Namjoon dunked his head in a pot of paint and drew the straight line on a piece of paper on the ground with a scalp.
But that's also so interesting how that piece, how one piece by Le Montagnard turns into a new piece by Namjoon.
Exactly.
They have this common root, and then they become two different works. I think it's just amazing. It shows really the strength in that interpretation. I think it's like how it becomes something else.
Yeah, and now everybody knows the Zen for head, not really the performance of Namjoon Paik, right? Not the one that I'm trying to find the score that I was thinking about, but I cannot. Yeah, anyway.
But I think it can be I think it's, to me, it's important anyway to keep in mind that it's a radicality in these works, and one of the radicality, one radicality, of course, is like the openness and so forth, but also in some of the works also that there is this tension and sometimes even violence in some of these scores. So I think I wouldn't want to make them into some kind of cute, nice, intimate, cozy. There's also something else going on, I think, and yeah.
Definitely, that is something that I know for the Fluxus people they weren't argumentative about it, but they were adamant in their performance realizations that there must be aspects of all types of emotions and gestures. Some violent, some gentle, some almost invisible, some deafening, so and some dangerous and ridiculous at the same time, like Ken Friedman's piece where he throws I think a grape out the window, then he throws an orange out the window, then he throws a watermelon out the window. When we performed it at the Kitchen in 1979, I had to guard the window because I had to make sure that nobody was under the window when the watermelon went.
So I
And
think
we were wearing tuxedos.
yeah, that was the style at that time, exactly, to wear tuxedos. I think there are some comments from the audience, let's say.
Hello, thank you for invitation. It was my comment because when you are talking about the idea and that it's still living or not, and with such a question, I wanted to share with you the last publication that I edited, and here you can find the article of Austrian digital artist Georg Eckmeyer about inspirations by Fluxus scores in the digital art, meaning in the blockchain art. So this is the idea of the art minted in blockchain as the NFT art, and with the consideration about authorship, about the authenticity of the artwork, and about, of course, signature of the artwork. So if you have some free time, just this is two links that I've sent you, and I think that it could be interesting because it's not live only in the performance arts and in live art, but the idea are still living also in the artwork as a digital tool, digital media, and the digital character of the art. So these are two links that I send you on the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, I asked in my thesis actually also a question whether it's possible to scores to be performed by non-human beings or maybe some computer generated, right? Situations, because that's we are in a totally different reality at the moment. So that's why I also asked you at the beginning whether it have to be performed as a performance, right? Like maybe there are other ways.
at some level, AI is totally Fluxus. It's just figuring out what that level might be.
Yeah, somebody said probably randomness, right? But that's probably more complicated than that. And it's just but it's yeah. I have
Well,
to.
it becomes. I mean, think of a system that matures itself, a system
Mhm.
that evolves once without our further uh, what's the word? Without our further intervention.
Mhm. Mhm.
Setting in motion something like that,
Mhm.
wondering what the hell it's going to result, is very Fluxus. Yeah, the paranoia and the commerce and the creation of myths and falsehoods, all that is not
Mhm.
Fluxus. Although there is a parallel in the issue of myth. There is a parallel with what happened with Fluxus, and that so much of Fluxus activity has become mythologized, and as we lose the artists, the musicians, the writers associated with Fluxus, uh, when it was when it was contemporary,
Mhm.
that process of mythologization only ramps up, only speeds up.
Yeah, that's why I also asked you about the possible, let's say maybe not preservation in a sense of but the continuation, but preservation also like not to see. But that's another question whether we should see Fluxus only as a historical, phenomena or like period, or is something that it's something more than that and like continues in even bodies or minds of different people while we are doing all those scores. But that's probably for
Well,
everybody.
yes, you you have to accept it as an historical phenomenon, and you also have to accept it as a phenomenon that can live past its history.
Hmm.
I think you can say the same of many distinct uh, art or artistic movements, artistic tendencies. We still work off surrealism now, 100 years after its formal declaration. We still respond to the provocations of Dada. We still continue to discover things in Italian futurism, in Russian Cuba futurism, in English vorticism, etc. We continue to discover, ideas so radical that they surprise us uh, several generations after their authors have vanished. So I think Fluxus is the perfect phenomenon to preserve a history in a way that allows you to participate in the history with the materials of the history. In other words, saying a researcher looking at Gene Brown's collection, the items in the Getty, that researcher picks up an object in the collection and is performing it by doing so. Perhaps
I,
the
I, ca-
researcher
I can
himself.
I can kind of chip into this because I'm sorry. I mean, it's like because my research methodology is doing this podcast somehow to a certain extent. But I just did this episode about the work that is in Jean Brown collection in at the Getty, and which is an example of a work that if you are just looking at it and interacting with it within this kind of reading room at the Getty as a researcher in the archive, you are not performing actually. So it's a Larry Miller work, which consists of two parts, and actually which is one part is a clock and the second part is a fan. And the fan is moving in the speed of the clock, and the clock is moving in the speed of the fan. So, but somehow and this is kind of one of issues that are kind of what is happening to Fluxus, many of Fluxus objects somehow, is that they are being kind of stripped of this concepts by how they have been collected and archived. And so this work, for example, has been collected as a kind of completely separated two objects, which they kind of like, if you don't have them together, it makes no sense. The work makes no sense to a certain extent. So it's not always, sometimes those kind of archiving processes or collecting processes of institutional collecting processes are still kind of doing something to those objects that are preserving the objects, but not necessarily preserving the work itself. So that's kind of, and this is something that the project that I'm working for is looking closely at. So there is, yeah. And kind of commenting on what you have said before and your question about the Fluxus being an historical phenomenon, or is this kind of something that still exists? And I think Peter is completely right on that. This is at the same time historical, of course, phenomena, but at the same time, we're thinking about, if we think about conceptual art, for example, it is also a historical phenomenon, but at the same time, it's a methodology that has been, or kind of artistic practice, artistic way of thinking that has been incorporated into artistic practice and is being practiced, right? And I think about Fluxus a little bit in a similar vein somehow, that to a certain extent, this is something that we can do Fluxus as a practice. It's not necessarily the same Fluxus, but it's a methodology somehow of doing things, of doing art.
I had a thought. I've been working on a project on Benjamin Patterson for a few years now. And the way the thought goes is Patterson was really interested in opera. He has a famous piece. It's like three operas: Madame Butterfly, Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, and Carmen. And he does each one in 10 minutes. And I was thinking about like something Peter said early on of like we have to define the event score like as different than Capro's happenings, right? And like another parallel, I guess, would be like the Viennese actionism of Hermann Nietzsche, right? And like the violence, all-encompassing violence of that like total theater of, where you have your ritual, you're killing a goat, and like other people are doing their like Satan dance and all of that, right? But I think that for Patterson, what was interesting about the opera is that he didn't really actually want to create that all-encompassing spectacle, which is something I was thinking about with the comparison to AI, right? It's like Fluxus was like part of history, but it wasn't history itself. It was a fantasy in a way of Machunas to like create this Fluxus party, or something. But yeah, so like, what does it mean to like participate without like mythologizing in a kind of like practical level? That's just the thought. Yeah.
Well, one question is, what's wrong with mythologizing? At least in the context of Fluxus. If it doesn't obscure the factual aspects that we need to deal with, if it doesn't change dates or personnel, then the mythologizing But mythologizing was part of the discourse even while Fluxus was most active, because it was so secretive, it was so intimate, it was so much. In fact, it was rejected by a lot of artists as something these crazy people in in Soho and Wiesbaden and Tokyo were doing. When I talked to conceptual artists like Saul Lewitt and Lawrence Weiner, if they acknowledged Fluxus' existence at all, they dismissed it as a kind of an in-group, that they weren't involved in presenting for the world. They were just some sort of little cult. And you perhaps Machunas wanted it that way, but and it looked that way, but it wasn't that way, as you know. So the mythologizing can work both ways. It could obscure what Fluxus actually was and how it operated, but it could also enhance the presence, both actual and historical, of what turns out to be, without the mythologizing, a very influential phenomenon.
I think also the mythology taps into some kind of oral tradition, I would say, maybe like how stories and works and relationships and whatever, how they operate in some kind of a narrative oral tradition. I mean, also I was thinking about Yoko Ono's one-woman show at MoMA. It's like really creating a mythology around that event. So I think it can also operate sometimes as a tool, or like as a way of creating a situation or a mythology around some very small, minute activity or even non-activity. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's also part of the maybe you could say that it's part of a methodology, even like mythologizing work or situations or something. I mean, also, Eric Anderson's trip to the USSR that ends in some postcard from Machunas where he describes events that never happened and so forth. So it's also a way of, I don't know, creating a storytelling situation, maybe.
Creating a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah, a legend.
Yeah.
And I'm also exploring actually this mythologizing to a certain extent, or and storytelling those myths and kind of like perpetuating them as actually a conservation or preservation strategy. So I mean, yeah, I completely agree with Peter that there's what is like asking this question of what is wrong with mythologizing, because to a certain extent, almost all stories in art history are somehow, mythologized to a certain extent, and that's, yeah, I don't know, stories of Van Gogh and his brother, or I don't know, like Michelangelo or whatever. I mean, there are those myths of those people and what they were doing and they were not. And sometimes they are not obscuring any facts. They're just kind of like making them, articulating them in a different way, I would say, which stays more than kind of, I don't know, like history.
Do you have any maybe final comments? Because I don't want to keep you very long.
I mean, I can just ask a question, because I think that we haven't been totally exploring even Swirl, and I'm some kind of, I'm looking at it and how it is evolving. I'm kind of following. I'm not like super participating yet, but I'm just kind of trying to see what is happening there to understand how we can use it and what it is, what this tool is affording to us. And do you have already like any thoughts about what you have experienced as a creator of this, and if this is going in a way that you have envisioned?
I treat it more as an experiment still, and I don't think I had like really clear, I mean, idea what would become of that. Like I just knew what should be there to kind of, I don't know, sum up some things that are important for me, or maybe highlight some things that are important for me. But I think that at this moment that there has been quite a few already contributions and participations. I can see that it's more of what I mentioned earlier, that it's more of it functions. I don't know if more, but it functions also as a trigger to to think about something or reflect on something. Like I think that there are certain group of people who I can see that they check basically almost every single post, and I hope that it kind of sparks something. And I think in that sense, I don't think it's that necessary for me anymore that everybody performs or like contributes with certain materialization of something. But if it has this function, or like if it acts as a kind of trigger for somebody's mind, then I think it's a really nice way of experiencing the world or reality in that
It
sense.
actually gives us a model to experience non-Fluxus art, or non-Fluxus experience in the extreme as Fluxus, but in the mean as art.
Mhm.
Everything we do is music.
Yeah, so we'll see what will come up, but I'm happy that it works. I mean that there people contribute and people use it, so let's see what happens later. Anybody else? Maybe there's comments, there's the questions for our guests. We touch upon a lot of things, I think, like very also important for me, and like in general, very interesting aspects of not only Fluxus, but like art in general, or like how we can perceive certain historical also phenomena. So I'm very grateful for that, and if nobody has any more questions, then then I would like to maybe to have one more meeting next week. It's also Wednesday at 6 p.m. this time, and there will be Eric Anderson and Gabriela Daris. She's also a historian working on her PhD on Yoko Ono, actually, and Chris Reeves, an artist from Chicago, also quite interested in Fluxus-like activities, contemporary, and we'll be talking more about contemporaneity, but not in a sense like also following Fluxus or a contemporary artist following Fluxus tradition, but in the terms of like why do we need Fluxus today, and how can we experience this in a totally different world than we have now. But mostly yes, why is it still important and relevant? Of is it actually? But and for me it is. So I asked the question why. So.
Will you send the invite to
I
all of
will,
us?
yes, I will send over tomorrow. I
Yes,
create the date and then send it out tomorrow. So,
cool.
and
It's
it's
been
also
super fun to be participating here. Really interesting to hear the other.
yeah, it's happy to be here all. So it
Yeah.
makes it yeah, and also I decided also to extend this format of just application to conversations that happen with people who maybe have different points of view on that.
Cool.
Share some thoughts. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you so much for the
Thank you for the
invitation.
invite.